Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the best lures for September bass fishing. September's already here, however, it does not feel like it. It's still very warm out. Water temps are in the low 70s, even in the 80s, depending on where you're and what lake I'm fishing as of recently. It's hot. It's been hot. Usually what happens in September is you'll get some cold fronts happening and those fish will start to push shallow. That has not happened yet. They are still out deep. They're still acting in their August patterns, but we're right at the beginning of September and we've had a couple cool nights. We have a couple cold fronts coming up soon. And as soon as those water temperatures start to dip, you hit that mid 70s, low 70s even in water temp, that's when those fish are really gonna start to move shallow. Not all of them, it's still gonna be tough, but they'll start to make their transition, and those fish know when it's coming. They know it better than we do, and they'll start sooner than we think. A lot of times, just the shorter days those fish know, and they'll start to transition up shallower just to get their final fall feed, and then they'll make their way back offshore. However, in the fall, you'll also have fish that still live offshore. They never come up shallow, and that's something we'll talk about more in October. That's more of an October thing. In September, I approach it two ways. It depends on the time of year and where you're at. So here in Pennsylvania, end of August, beginning of September, we're gonna have fish start to transition shallow. Further north than us, we probably already have fish starting to transition shallow. Further south, this might not happen until October for you, so keep that in mind. It's usually water temperature dependent. Like I said, that low 70 mark, that's really when it starts to happen. You're gonna have fish start to come shallow, and I'm gonna fish it that way. That's the way I like to fish in September, mostly because you're not gonna get a lot of bites. So I'm gonna try and target bigger fish, or I'm gonna try and target getting numbers of bites, and I'm gonna do that with my bait selection. So my numbers bait, no doubt right here, is the wacky rig. I will fish any isolated target up on the bank. If it looks good, it looks like it should have a fish on it, I will soak a wacky rig right next to it, and I'll be very thorough with this bait and just try and get a lot of bites. You're gonna catch a lot of small fish doing this, but at the end of the day, you're also gonna get a lot of bites, catch a lot of fish, and that's what I'm using the wacky rig for. I'm not trying to catch 10 pounders on the wacky rig. While it will happen, and if you go through enough numbers, you're gonna catch big fish on the wacky rig as well. You're gonna catch a lot of small ones, and that's for those days when the fishing is just absolutely brutal. You can't get bites. That's when I'm gonna go to that bait right there. Usually, for us, that's the end of August, beginning of September, before those fish really make their transition shallow. After we've had a couple of our cold fronts, I'm gonna start changing it up with my bait selection here, and that's gonna show in these ones right here. So the first one that I'll go to after that water temp starts to dip just a little bit, those fish are still shallow, but they're still heavy bluegill eaters. They're gonna be chasing bait up there, but they're gonna be looking for cover still. They're not gonna be roaming yet. You still have maybe cold mornings, but warmer days. Those fish are still gonna look for that cover to hang out in the middle of the day. That's when I'm gonna go with a frog. I will be able to fish it through the thickest of cover. They'll be hanging out in it, trying to eat a lot of those big fish when they transition shallow. Instead of them going and just roaming around or holding on a small laydown, those big fish are gonna claim the best piece of structure or cover up there. And that can be very, very thick cover. It can be a very big overhanging bush that creates a lot of shade. It could be a combination of both. And the frog is gonna get it done in those areas. You're actually gonna be able to skip it under those bushes. You're gonna be able to fish it through no matter what type of cover you're presented with up there on the bank. And it mimics bluegills excellent. It's a very, very good bluegill imitator. And it can mimic frogs if they jump in off the bank or anything like that. Overall, it just gives a bass a reason to bite something. It's a big meal. It's top water always catches bigger fish when they want to cooperate on it. So once that water temperature cools down and you can get them going on a frog, that's really my favorite way to get them going. And it really allows me to cover a ton of water as well. Mostly what I'm gonna do, there's a couple different ways you can fish a frog on different setups and stuff. The setup that I like to choose, because I'm gonna cover a ton of water, is using actually like a 7'3" heavy, almost like a swim jig frog type rod. I'll put it on 65-pound braid in a fast gear ratio reel, but I'm gonna cover water down the bank. Like I'm gonna pick out a shade pocket. Like we have this shade pocket right behind me right here. I'd skip it up under that tree. I'd fish it right out of the shade. And as soon as it got out of the strike zone, I'd be reeling that back in and making another cast. And you do that repeatedly all down the bank. You cover a ton of water, just repeated cast, 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 work it out of the prime area, reel that right back in and make another cast. You're covering a lot of water. Your numbers are going to go way down compared to the Senko. But if you set the hook on this frog in September, when those fish are up there cruising shallow, and you put it in a nice heavy piece of cover up there, most likely it's going to be a bigger fish than you will catch on the Senko. So often, if I'm fishing a tournament, I'll pair the two together. I'll catch fish on the Senko, get my limit in the boat, throw the frog and try and catch some big ones. If I'm just out there fun fishing and I just want to catch numbers, I'll throw the Senko. If I'm just out there fun fishing and I'm just trying to catch the biggest bass I can, I will target them specifically with this frog right here. So it all depends on what you're trying to do. And then lastly, towards the end of September, once that water cools down enough and those fish start to roam a little bit, they become bait fish chasers. They start to look for shad. They're just looking to eat as much as they can to last through the winter. That's when that real fall feed starts to happen. That's when I'm going to break this guy out right here, and that's going to be some type of walk the dog topwater, a spook, whatever you have. This is a 6 Sense Dogma right here. This is the 115. You can throw whatever size you want. You're going to have to gear that towards your bait fish. If you have smaller bait, which we do right now, I'm going to throw the 115. If you have some bigger bait or you're trying to target some bigger fish, you could go with the Catwalk. That's an awesome one, but it's a very big profile. So it depends on what you're targeting, how big the bait is, all of that stuff. So that's when I'm going to go with this spook right here. Those fish are going to start roaming on the bank. They're not going to be huddled up in a piece of cover anymore. And while there still will be fish that do that, there's going to be a lot more fish up there shallow that are just looking to feed. They're going to be in an area rather than a piece of cover. So if they're not as tight, you can cover a lot more water working this bait around and covering a lot of water. I will literally just go down the bank and just work this thing as fast as I can and cover a bunch of water. When this bait really shines is when the turnover happens. So what turnover is actually the surface of the water becomes colder than the underneath of the water, like deeper down in the water. Right now, the coldest water's out deep, so that's where those fish want to be. When that flips, those fish are going to have to come up shallow and try and get that colder water. They're chasing cold water, so that's what they're going to come up and do. The bait fish are going to go there, and then the bass will come next. So often, the key indicators of turnover sometimes that I look for, if you're trolling around up shallow, I was yesterday, there was a ton of shad on the bank, just balls of shad trolling their way down the bank, swimming down the bank, doing whatever they were doing. The bass weren't there yet, but those bait fish are starting to show up, which means the bass aren't going to be far behind. When that happens, that's when I'm going to start covering water with the spook and really just trying to see what I can get going with that thing. You'll catch a lot of fish doing that. This is like a combination of the two when the conditions get right. Numbers, you'll catch numbers depending on the size of spook you pick, but you'll also catch quantity as well. But you'll also catch some quality as well with this bait. When those fish are up there really looking for shad, really trying to eat, if you present that bait properly and cover the correct areas and eventually run into them, you'll catch some quality fish on that presentation there. Those fish like to get really, really shallow in September. They go shallower than people think, but when that water turns over and they have that colder water up there shallow, they'll start to move up there and chase that bait. So don't put that past them in the month of September. That's the way that I like to approach them. Once October rolls around, that's when you're going to see some deep baits start to come out. We'll also talk about some smallmouth stuff. So if you enjoyed today's video and want to see more best baits videos, the ones that I did for August are right here. And the October one's going to be coming up shortly. So go ahead and hit that like and subscribe down below so you don't miss that one coming up. If you want to see some big fish and some smallmouth and catching a lot of fish throughout the fall, it's one of my favorite times of year coming up, so you're not going to want to miss that. We're going to be talking about all that in some near videos coming soon. So stay tuned. We're going to be getting after the videos for the rest of the season.